But I want to touch on our breaking news just since we've come on air. So just in the last 15 minutes or so, that news concerning Donald Trump and the fraud case in New York against him. Well, the judge has reached his decision and has published it online. Donald Trump found liable to pay $350 million odd in penalties for fraudulently overstating his net worth to dupe lenders. That is basically the decision of the judge. We found out some other details. We are going through that judgment and going through the details of it, but also banning Donald Trump from being a director of a company effectively in New York for 3 years and for applying for certain loans. But the headline figure there will be that figure you see on the screen, which Donald Trump must pay. Now, we know previously, A, he has denied any wrongdoing, and B, he has said that he will appeal. So we are not expecting that amount to be paid immediately, but that is the decision of the judge, that basically he has to pay it. Right, let's try and understand what is going on here. We can speak to Rachel Paulos, former United States attorney. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
What's your reaction to what we've just reading now in the last few minutes from the judge here?
Well, this is a devastating judgment. Not only are the damages well in excess of what Mr. Trump had imagined and very close to the full amount that the New York Attorney General sought, but with the New York State interest rate, I imagine that this final damage assessment will be well over $400 million. Donald Trump predicted months ago that the judge would apply the corporate death penalty to him, and that seems to be what he's doing, not only with the significant damages amount, but also barring him from serving as a top officer, barring him and his sons from running any New York business for 3 years. This really goes to the heart of the Trump business empire in a way that we have not yet seen.
Interesting. And just remind us what the original accusation was, what Donald Trump has been found to have been done wrong here.
So months ago, the judge found that Donald Trump had committed fraud in overstating the value of his properties in an attempt to obtain more favorable loan terms. And in what's called a summary judgment decision, the judge determined that fraud had been committed, and a trial was held really simply to determine the amount of damages and other consequences, including the appointment of a monitor, as you mentioned earlier, to continue to oversee the Trump business holdings.
And talk us through now then what happens next, because this is a document that's been released. We've read it, that huge sum, $350 million odd to pay. What happens now?
Well, the American system of justice is a tiered system, meaning that this judge does not have the last word on this case, and this decision is not the final order that we would expect to see in this matter. The former president, can appeal this decision, all aspects of it, and it has been harsh towards him. His lawyers have been sanctioned. He's been disciplined in terms of what he's able to do in running a company. He's been determined to have committed fraud, and the judge tried to dissolve all of his businesses in New York. And so really the former president has no option but to appeal this, and that appeal could take months or even years, stretching well beyond the next presidential election in this country.
Interesting. And during that process, that appeal process, does the fine have to be paid and held, or does nothing happen until the outcome of the appeal is known?
I'm certain that the former president's lawyers will ask for any fine to be held in abeyance until a higher court makes a decision on whether Judge Engoron's decision is correct.
Interesting. And what impact, I know we've only just had this in the last few minutes or so this one might be difficult to get a proper assessment of, but what impact will this have on the organisation? First of all, him running any organisation right now in New York, keeping across his business interests, because can he still operate elsewhere? What's the kind of impact immediately on him?
That's a complicated question. It's a good question. And I think the Trump organization is trying to reestablish business in other states. There's a question of how much and whether they need to run that by the monitor that the judge has already appointed in this state. But one can certainly envision a world in which the Trump organization picks up roots in New York, where it built its business empire, and reestablishes a network in another part of the United States.
And let's just remind people who are just tuning in, because we have two significant news stories happening right now, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. We started the programme talking around the events surrounding Alexei Navalny, and just this news has broken, so we're covering it now. So people who are just tuning in, just remind us, what has the judge effectively decided here, Rachel?
So the judge had previously imposed sanctions on President Trump and his attorneys. He had previously found Donald Trump committed fraud. He had previously tried to dissolve all of Donald Trump's businesses, and he had established a monitor. We now know that that monitor will be in place for at least 3 more years. We now know that the judge has assessed damages in the amount of over $350 million. And we now know that the judge is barring Mr. Trump and his sons from running any business in New York for the immediate future. This is a devastating blow to the Trump organization.
And to be clear, this, in your eyes, is at the higher end of what the judge could have decided here?
Well, the Attorney General was seeking $370 million in damages. And so he certainly, when you think about the spectrum of the damages he could have imposed, he certainly went much closer to the AG's number than to the Trump organization's number.
And in terms of the impact on Donald Trump, 350 million, from your understanding, what kind of impact will that have?
Well, Forbes magazine has estimated the former president's wealth to be at somewhere between $2.5 to $3 billion. So it's an amount, and he and Mr. Trump had previously testified that he has $400 million in cash. He wouldn't have to liquidate any assets to pay this kind of a fine. However, as we discussed, the $350 million sum doesn't include the interest rate that could be tacked on top of that. Moreover, even for a man who is a billionaire 3 times over, this sum represents something like 15% of his wealth. It's a significant amount. And I'm sure it's very disappointing to the former president.
That is interesting. Great to get your analysis. Thank you so much for talking us through that, Rachel Pullers. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's the immediate reaction there to that decision by the judge. Donald Trump found liable to pay $350 million odd in a fine. We don't think he will pay it immediately because there will be an appeal. What we're looking at there is the court document written by the judge, effectively his decision deciding already that Donald Trump had been found guilty in this instance, and this is the penalty. We've looked at the legal side. We'll be getting plenty of political reaction to this as well. And